the Women's Club had their nearly new sale coming in right after the farmers market. And we found that we had to do a lot of the cleaning and wiping things down. So the only question I would have, does it allow the employees enough time between activities to be able to clean the building for the next one? It's the only question I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I see Rod writing a note to address your question. Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, any select board comments? Okay, go ahead, Marcia.
I think I should bring up a concerning note that was on the listserv this week about dogs. And I intend to bring that up in another realm when we talk about the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you, Marcia. And certainly, I think there's been some discussion about possible action around dog issues. I think it's a question of staff bandwidth, but we should talk about it if you decide to pull the letter. Okay, so let's move on to the consent agenda. So when we approve the consent agenda, we're receiving correspondence, we're approving the AP warrant. In this case, we're approving the winter salt bids, and we're approving the draft meeting minutes from 10:20 and 10:27. We can, when we make a motion for the consent agenda, we can have limited discussion during it, but if there's a substantial discussion for any of these items, it is our practice to pull them and approve them separately. So, is there anything of significant discussion that should be pulled? Go ahead, Marcia.
I wanted to pull the John Feld memo and the Doug Wilberding memo. And did you say that we were going to talk about this, that the consent agenda was going to include the salt, or are we talking about that later?
The consent, in this case, it's in the consent agenda. So if we were to approve the consent agenda, we're approving the winter salt bid. If you would like to have a discussion about the winter salt bid, you should pull it to discuss separately.
Please pull it then. I would like to.
Okay. Anyone else? So, Marcia, can you make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the items with the caveat of pulling the items that you would like pulled? How about that?
Yes. I move to accept the consent agenda with the exception of pulling the memorandum from John Feld, the memorandum from Doug Wilberding, and the recommendation for salt purchase for the roads.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mary. All in favor? Any further discussion on what is not included in these ones that we're pulling? Okay, so all in favor of approving the consent agenda, absent of these things we're pulling, please raise your hand. Okay, great. So now we'll discuss the things that we want pulled. So why don't we actually start with the winter salt bid first. Go ahead, Marcia. You wanted to discuss this.
Sure. I remember some time ago, Doug Wilberding talking about the issue of, the sourcing of things and finding things that are in the United States. And I'm looking at, maybe Cargill is in Ohio, but I don't know where they source stuff. And I'm just wondering if that was a consideration because, fitting in with our goals to reduce our carbon footprint.
Okay, Claudette, did you have I'll note that question. Marcia, Claudette, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I actually looked it up. It's sourced from either New York State, Ohio, or I want to say Alabama. So it's all sourced in the U.S.
Rod is nodding. Thank you, Claudette, for your diligence, and Marcia for your question. Any further discussion on this? Can we make a motion, which is how we probably should have began, apologies. Can we make a motion to accept the winter salt bid and thus approving it? Go ahead, Claudette.
I move to accept the winter salt bid from Cargill.
I second.
Second, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. We'll begin with correspondence next. The correspondence from John Feldy. Go ahead, Marcia, well, why don't we begin with a motion to accept this and we'll discuss it in our discussion. How's that? Who would like to make the motion?
I will.
Okay.
I make a motion to accept the correspondence from John Feldy. Or Feld.
Second, seconded by Rob. Okay, seconded by Rob. All right, any further discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
This is another concern about traffic calming and issues, related to safety. And I'm just thinking that this keeps coming up and going around, and that we have, I'm thinking 5 big broad categories of safety: policing, speeding, dogs, walking, bicycling. And by dogs, I'm referring to an alleged pit bull attack that happened in town. And so I'm proposing that the board sort of start to take action on this by thinking about maybe starting something of a safety committee, which would have maybe 5 groups to talk about those different 5 things. And perhaps we'd have a select board member, because we have so much time, but sit on each of those committees. And that could maybe, with direction, help inform the work that we need to do on all of those things and help it bubble up to the top, as opposed to just becoming mired. That's the proposal.
Thank you, Marcia. The only thing I would chime in to say, and I want to see what everyone else think, is we have a study that we have an RFP to begin to look at these questions. And so, I think the method for getting at some of these questions may be that RFP, or it may be as you proposed. So I would, I think a process will become imminent soon, is what I might say. Or we would have to make a decision on a process imminently or soon, right? So I'll say that. You have a follow-up, and then I'll ask other board members.
Yeah. I know someone in the community had asked me what was the status of the RFP, and I couldn't answer that. But I think that I see that as sort of one prong of a multi-pronged issue in town. So it might be, it might bleed into some other things and help our analysis, but I don't think it's going to solve all of those other problems.
Okay. Any further comments on this? Because it's not an agenda item. We're speaking in the realm of the correspondence. Good, Claudette.
Although I think this is just a very bad time to be proposing something of that.
Yeah.
I just think it's a bad time. I would say I would be more inclined to discuss it after January. But that's just me.
Thanks, Claudette. And I'm going to take Mary's comment. I'm going to turn to Rod, because there's been, we've heard from other staff members. I've had some conversations, because my sort of swan song is the animal control ordinance. That was what I really wanted to work on that when I first started on the board. So anyway, maybe I'm unnecessarily defensive because it's something I've wanted to do. Go ahead, Mary, and then I'm going to turn to Rod.
I think it's useful to think of safety as a theme. It seems to me we could come at it from a lot of different directions. Part of it's public works. If we can get a director there, that would inform it. Some of it is health related. I just think some of it's police related. So I do agree with Roger that it's process related, and with Claudette, it's also timing. But it's not like we're not aware. And I just think it's a very interesting way Marcia's put it together to call it a theme of safety. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Rod quickly. Linda Cook, I'm not sure if your hand is still up or if it's new. So, but I'll get to
Well,
you. I don't want to call on you.
down.
I don't want to call on you now. I just want to make sure that your hand is not an old hand, that it's a new comment.
It was new because I was stuck in the waiting room and I couldn't get out. But no, you can put it down. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to turn to Rod. You're
I
muted.
really regret that.
Okay, you're good.
So, so good evening, everyone. I just want to reassure you that there is actually a town staff safety committee that meets on a quarterly basis. And so at least some of the items that Marcia identified could be addressed through that process. And so if you like, I can check with records and see when the next time that meeting is scheduled to happen.
That's news to, I think, all of us. I never knew about that.
It's comprised, I believe, of the DPW director, who's vacant, the police chief, the fire chief, and the town manager. So
Okay,
we can move forward with that.
That's great.
Which is not to make light of or against of any of the observations that were made by either Mr. Feldy or by Marcia.
Right. Okay, great. So we've, I think this will be taken up again. There's at least, I referenced the study, the policing study. So that's one point of entry. And Rod mentioned the safety committee. That's another point of entry. So I promise to circle back, but Marcia, you promised to remind me. Okay. And then, did you have a comment? And then Andy Shear, and then I really would like to move on.
Just would like to hear in the future reports or something from Rod or the next town manager about what's going on in that committee. I think it will inform us.
Yeah, I think that's great. And Rod's nodding. I don't know if you saw that with the towel. Okay, Andy Shear, go ahead. Just state your name and address, I guess. That's how we do it.
Yeah, here 23 Hazen Street. I just want to thank Marcia for your comments. I really think that's great. I really appreciate you saying that. And then Rod, I'm wondering, is this committee that you meet, is it something where public input could be taken into consideration? So just for food for thought. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So we have, as a motion, we were discussing a motion. So any further discussion, or can we call the question? Okay, all in favor of receiving this correspondence with thanks, please raise your hand. Okay, unanimous, thank you. Marcia, can you begin with a motion for the next correspondence?
Yes, I move that we accept the correspondence from Doug Wilberding concerning the FTC and the Energy Committee.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mary. Okay, any discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
Doug provided a guide that's provided by the FTC concerning the use of endorsements and testimonials. And I think that at the very least, the Energy Committee needs to review that, because the advertising that was included in the packet that they're doing was concerning to me. And not only the endorsements of particular businesses and the result of having solar, in that it would increase the value of your home, and testimonials from people. All of those things, according to this guide from the FTC, have to have a basis in fact and have actual evidence. And I think it would be useful for, I've mentioned it before, I'm concerned about promoting any particular businesses under the auspices of the town. And I think it would be timely to look at that sort of thing and to take it as cautionary that we shouldn't be doing things that could bring the scrutiny of things like the FTC on the town. And I'd also like to look at the charge for that committee to see if one of the things they were charged to do was to vet different businesses and recommend them to the town residents. I think that's concerning.
So my question to board members with this correspondence and with Marcia's comments is there further action that the board would like to take in light of this correspondence? And if so, what might that be? And if we're not sure at this time, you just let me know if you believe it's a future agenda item or not a future agenda item. Does that make sense? Okay, so anyone have any comments? Go ahead, Claudette.
Why don't we have Aaron Lamperti come to our next meeting?
Okay. I would
And
say
I would also suggest that Marcia, I think you might be the only one that received that FTC information from Doug, because I didn't. And
I think
that should be shared with Aaron as well.
Did Miranda get that too? I think you
So-
might. No?
when Miranda
I'll
doesn't
share it.
necessarily always include the attachments or downloads of links that people have for the packet. She includes the correspondence, and so
Okay. To whom shall I send it?
you can send it. You can send it to all of us just include as an FYI only. We won't take any discussion. We'll receive a document.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? The only thing I would say for the interest of time is that the Energy Committee is scheduled to talk to us a little bit about their proposed budget items. We may wish to do it then, as opposed to our next meeting, because we have a budget schedule. So we'll be hearing from them, so we can just talk to them, and in the meanwhile, we can send this correspondence and the minutes and the recording, so they have the context. Okay. All right, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay, so all in favor of receiving this correspondence, please raise your hand. Thank you. Anything else? That's it, right? Okay. Well, I am now exhausted after our consent agenda, but nonetheless, we move on. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, so next is a resolution for Dr. John Edward Lawe.
I thought it was the AP warrant, the water bill AP.
Oh, yes. No, thank you. Thank you for, I had made that motion. So yes, so basically this is just a bill to the fire district for water. And I can share it on my screen. Well, Rob, can you set the total amount for us? Do you have that handy?
Actually,
You do?
I don't believe it.
You do? Okay, so Cheryl has it, great.
It just went away.
So I'm not, so with everyone's forbearance, I'm just gonna tell you the total amount. So the bill is for $444.01. It wasn't part of the packet, so it's a separate item. It's for water from July through October. Can I get a motion? It's in the motion sheet. Mary, you're on mute.
Sorry. I move to approve check warrant number 22-10 in the amount of $444.01 payable to the Norwich Fire District.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any discussion on this? I can can find it in my email and share my screen, but I trust you know the entity and that you trust my reading of the amount. Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, excellent, thanks. Sorry for putting you on the spot. All right, so next, now we'll read a resolution for Dr. John Edward Lawe. And so the board resolution is in recognition of Dr. Lawe's contributions to the town. As I think most folks know, he recently passed on. So I'm going to do my best with sort of an echoey Tracy Hall and a mask to read this resolution, and then I'll ask for a motion to approve it, okay? So a resolution honoring Dr. John Edward Lawe for his service to the town of Norwich. Whereas John E. Lawe was an esteemed member of our community who passed away on October 14th, 2021 at the age of 92, and whereas for the past 43 years, John was actively involved in town government in numerous ways, both officially and unofficially, that benefited the town immeasurably, including serving as the Norwich Health Officer from 1978 into 2021, and serving as a member of the Select Board between 1982 and 2000, and serving also as clerk of the Select Board when he drafted many policies and ordinances that today still define many of the roles and responsibilities of town officials and departments, and serving as a member of the Norwich Zoning Board of Adjustment and as chair of that board's successor, the Development Review Board, for many years into 2021. And whereas John was also one of the first members of the Norwich Fast Squad when it was formed in 2002, and whereas John served additionally into 2021 as the Infection Control Coordinator for evaluating possible exposures to bloodborne pathogens as defined in the Norwich Bloodborne Pathogen Exposure Control Plan, and whereas John was also represented Norwich in many regional organizations, including the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission, the Connecticut River Joint Commission, and the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And whereas John's involvement in both town and civic organizations contributed greatly to the quality of life in Norwich and beyond, and whereas John was involved in all of the aforementioned roles and organizations in a manner that earned him respect for his character, graciousness, and demeanor, where he knew how to disagree without being disagreeable. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved that the Norwich Select Board, on behalf of the town of Norwich, most gratefully acknowledge his contributions and dedication to the town and to the regions, celebrates his life and accomplishments, and expresses admiration for a life well lived. Now be it further resolved that the Select Board extends to his family and to his many friends profound gratitude for all the tangible and intangible ways that John gave of his time and effort to the town and to the community. Thank you to Neil Fulton with Linda Cook's encouragement for that resolution. Can I get a motion?
Yeah, I'll do it. I move to approve the resolution in recognition of Dr. John Edward Lawe's contributions to the town of Norwich.
Is there a second? Seconded by Rob.
Second, yeah.
And then any further discussion or any board members would like to make any comments, and then I'll also ask members of the public.
I
Go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
In the John's example of how useful, how important it is to serve the town you live in, was the inspiration for me to join my first committee. And since then, continue in service to the town on the hopes that I could be 1/10 the contribution that he had given to the town. He'll be missed.
Thank you, Rob. Any members of the public would like to make a comment or? Okay, not seeing any. We're of course happy to have this resolution with as it read, with the thanks for a life well lived. And yeah, I'll call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Okay. Next is the appointment to the Solid Waste Committee. We're scheduled to make 2 appointments to the Solid Waste Committee. There's 2 vacancies. Miranda has indeed confirmed this to be factually the case, so we won't have to worry. We won't have that blunder that we did last time with the Historical Commission. So thank you to Miranda for your help with that. There's a couple things that I want to start before we hear from the applicants. There's 2 things. Like, one, these are youth voices, right? These are youth appointments. We have no rules about who serves and how they serve for committees in Norwich. And the other thing is that we have no terms for this committee today. The charge says that members may serve for 3, 2, or 1 term. And when we made the previous appointments, we knew the thought was that we would resolve this when we had the full membership. So something that we would need to decide, or we could decide, to make those appointments, or to make another motion, or just have a discussion that we would like the committee to make those decisions. So that's some background information in addition to hearing from the applicants, both of whom appear to be here with us. Anybody have any questions right now? Otherwise, I'll turn to the applicants. Okay, no questions? Okay, so why don't we begin with Bonnie Blake. So hi, Bonnie, just speak a little bit to your application. What made you interested in this position, and yeah, how'd you hear about it? Just say hey.
Okay. I'm Bonnie Blake. I'm a junior at Hanover High School, and I'm kind of interested in being a part of the Solid Waste Committee because I want to pursue a career working in kind of government or law. So I want to kind of get involved in a local government and make a change there. I heard about the position through an email that was sent out from the environmental club leaders that I'm a part of at school. In that club, I'm one of the leaders of the communications committee for the club. So kind of with my co-leaders, with one of the other members, we communicate with the rest of the school and on ways that they can be more environmentally friendly and do things correctly for the school. I guess there's something on the flyer that was sent out about wanting to maybe do things with social media for the committee, which is something that I could be of help with. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much, Bonnie. Does any board member have any questions for Bonnie's application? Go ahead, Marcia. You're on mute.
I've had too many late night meetings this week. Hello, Bonnie. I'm Marcia Calloway. I'm wondering, is there a solid waste committee in Hanover? And if there is, why were you particularly interested in the Norwich one?
I don't know that there is. I was kind of reached out to by the club, and I thought it would be interesting to be a part of. For Norwich, I don't live in Norwich, but I have my parents used to work up there, and so I've always been kind of in the community. And I figured that was something that I could maybe help with.
Thank you.
Great. Go ahead, Claudette.
Hi, Bonnie. Just wondering if there's something that the environmental club has done that you're most proud of.
Recently something that we're trying to do is we're changing the like lighting systems in the school so that they're more environmentally friendly. We're working on that currently, so it's still in the works, but that's something I think is a big step. We also have a climate action plan, which I'm pretty sure we've spoke about this at the beginning of the year, that I'm pretty sure no other school in the country, or maybe very few, have, where we're kind of making the entire student body aware of kind of everything that we're doing and reaching out to every department and section of the building to make change in the way that we run our school to make it most environmentally friendly.
That's great. Any other board members? I have one question. Any other board members have questions? Okay, my only question, Bonnie, is as I mentioned, there's terms can be 3, 2, or 1 year. Are you able to be committed to the committee for at least a year?
Yeah, I could do up to 2 years because I'll be graduating after then, but I'd be happy to be here for at least a year.
Great. Okay, any further questions for Bonnie? Otherwise, I'll take a motion first. Okay, go ahead, Claudette, would you like to make a motion?
I move that we appoint Bonnie Blake to the Solid Waste Committee for a term to be determined by the Solid Waste Committee.
Thank you, Claudette. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Rob. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Bonnie. Unanimous.
Thank you.
On the Solid Waste Committee. Our next applicant is Lily. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest in this committee?
Hi, I'm Lily Terry. I am also a student at Hanover. I'm a sophomore. I also heard about the position from an email sent out by the Environmental Club. And I'm interested in being a part of the committee because I'm really interested in environmental issues. And I think it would be, I think it's like, I want to pursue a career dealing with issues related to like sustainability and waste management, and like ways of creating a more sustainable way of life. And I think that being a part of this committee would be like a valuable experience in just in learning about different ways to pursue that. Yeah.
Great, thanks so much. Do folks have questions? My only question is the same. Do you think you could be committed to the committee for a year at least?
Yeah, I definitely could be.
That's great. Any further board questions? Okay, I'll take a motion.
Okay. I move to appoint Louis Terry to the Solid Waste Committee for a period of time to be determined.
I'll second that.
Okay, made by Rob, seconded by Mary. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Thanks so much for being here and for applying, and you're on the Solid Waste Committee. Thanks. And I see that Andy and Jack are here. They're happy to have new recruits. Okay, so let's move on to the interim town manager report. How's that? There was not a written report in the packet. I think we could be okay with a verbal report. We know how much Rod is working on, but so go ahead, Rod. Can you update us on some significant happenings? And we'll, some significant happenings.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm working on first of all, on the frequency of the written reports. I'm working on the idea that the second meeting of the month will be the written report, and the first meeting of the month will be a somewhat more truncated verbal update.
That's great.
Nevertheless, there's a lot to share. So the first issue I want to address is the item in the correspondence from Colin Johnson and related questions to do with the policy, the current policy on access to Tracy Hall. As you know, I've not yet updated the COVID emergency plan from the previous town manager, but we have been observing the day-to-day changes in conditions with regard to infection rates in the community and narrowly in Norwich, and then also in the wider community of Windsor County and neighboring New Hampshire. And like everybody else, I think I am concerned about the current trends. It is a constant topic of conversation amongst staff here at Tracy Hall and department heads as to what the most appropriate setting is for gaining access to the building and under what conditions. And so after consulting with staff, made the decision that outside organizations that have in the past utilized Tracy Hall for their activities will not be permitted access until the situation with COVID-19, and in particular the Delta outbreak, is more clearly resolved. In the short term, once that decision was made, in the short term, the only entity that was directly impacted was the Norwich Farmers Market. They were contacted proactively at my request by Miranda. And at no time in that interaction did we get feedback from the Norwich Farmers Market that this was an inconvenience, or they'd already committed to communicating to their vendors or their patrons that in fact it was going to happen at Tracy Hall. And then in follow-up conversations, we've offered them the opportunity to establish the Winter Farmers Market in the parking lot outside Tracy Hall on I want to say the northern side, the side closest to Danowitz. So, and we've not yet heard back from them, but we've made that offer. So the justification for this decision is that for direct town events and activities, we have the ability to control closely the population that's using the building, the circumstances under which they use the building, including being able to ask for and receive confirmation of vaccination or other vital information. And we have the ability to cancel it or reschedule it as might be deemed appropriate, given, for instance, confirmation that members of that demographic or that group have actually tested positive. That's not something that we can do for outside groups. Furthermore, with outside groups such as the farmers market, we have extreme difficulty in actually controlling how the building is used in the time that they've got access to the building. So it was for those reasons that we chose to inform the farmers market that it wouldn't be possible for us to host them for their winter farmers market session. And looking forward, we think that the next group that may be possibly impacted won't be until the Chinese New Year, and it would be the local Chinese community that has traditionally used the space to celebrate Chinese New Year in the February-March timeframe. And we expect to know more after Christmas, and we'll be in touch with them if we, again, reach the conclusion that the most appropriate and safe thing to do is to ask them to find a different venue. And then further on from that, I think it's another women's club event. The women's club event that was held some time ago, the nearly new sale was a commitment that had been made to the women's club by my predecessor, and I didn't feel it was appropriate to abruptly change that arrangement. They were careful and respectful, and I think we did well with that event, but I think it also highlighted for people here that when there's large numbers of people that we don't have much control over using the facility, it raises concerns. Of course, my first priority is for the safety of staff and to ensure that the building is accessible for public business. And so that's our first priority. And so that was the basis of that decision. So I don't feel it's necessary to validate this decision-making process by seeking professional scientific input. Of course, I welcome the public's comments and feedback. I wish we had more time to explain and outline the reason why we made this decision. But I would say somewhat in our defense that the background circumstances of COVID at this point in Windsor County are such that I don't believe it should have been a shock or a surprise that we made the decision that we did. I welcome, of course, the Select Board's comments on that as well. Moving on, Public Works, we, after making a job offer for the equipment operator position, we withdrew that offer on the basis of a background check. So we now still have no equipment operator. We've received 2 applications in the last 48 hours for the DPW director position. We've not begun the review process for those applicants yet. I do expect to have a consultant supporting the existing acting DPW director under contract by early next week. And I do expect that we will have information from local private contractors as to their availability to pick up snowplow routes and other work as needed over the winter, because I am now extremely concerned about our ability to fulfill the basic functions of public works for the winter season. And that is also acknowledging that there is a lot of fluidity in the staffing of town DPW departments across the valley. So there's lots of movement on the part of staff from in and out of the industry altogether and across towns. So I'm trying my hardest to ensure that we can commit to providing basic services over the winter.
Can we pause there for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So do folks have any questions about these first 2 items? I'm actually particularly any questions or comments around the DPW update? I want to begin with the DPW update. Marcia, is that a hand? You're on mute.
Sorry. There. It wasn't about DPW, but you said the first 2, so I threw up my hand. I'm just trying to remember what happened last year in Tracy Hall for the farmers market. Can you refresh my memory? Didn't happen?
No, it did not happen.
Thank you.
Good, Claudia.
Yeah, just a quick comment. If you listen to the governor's COVID briefings that are on Tuesdays, they continue to say, do not meet in large groups or inside if you can avoid it at any. So that is the messaging. And they just yesterday, they do not believe our rates are going to go down anytime soon.
Yes, they said yes. So I just want to make sure that folks picked up on, maybe it was just a kernel in Rod's point. we're beginning to investigate contracted or private support for winter maintenance due to some staffing issues. And I want to make sure we hear that, because I really sort of want sort of the town, right, sort of both staff and us, to sort of really understand what that means, and to know that we sort of, I think we need to sort of know what that means and really signal our support for this, right? Because there's a shortage, it's a labor crisis, and there's a shortage of, I won't say shortage, there's a difficulty even in procuring that work. So we're beginning a process that needs to then be evaluated again. So I want board members to certainly have empathy, but also understanding. Go ahead, I saw Mary's hand and then, or Claudette's hand and then Mary's hand.
Yeah, I thank Rod. It's only prudent to me to be investigating for sure.
That's great. Thank you, Claudette. Mary?
I think it's prudent, necessary, and timely what Rod is doing, and I hope he can find some contractors. I think the public will need some messaging because their routes may not be as clear. They're usually wonderfully clear, and they may not see the same level of service. So I think as select board, and possibly town manager, how to get the word out to, just let people know that it may not be what they have expected in the past.
Yeah, and I'll let Rod, go ahead, Marcia, and I'll let Rod sort of touch on that, Mary, because he was, I don't know how much he's working on that, actually.
No, I don't need to have the details. I just think, and it may be obvious to Rod, but I think, it's just something that needs to happen.
Great. All right. Thanks, Mary. Go ahead, Marcia.
I just wanted to ask budgetarily, presumably there's funds not being expended because we don't have drivers and people, but do you expect the contracted amount of help, if we can find it, to be less than, equal to, or more than what we've had to pay before? And do we have the money?
Do you want me to ask that?
You may, but I think it's just unknown, right?
Yes.
It's unknown. Okay.
Well, we have to do it, right?
I think yes, but I want us to know yes. But I think we'll obviously have answers to these questions as more. So I'm going to let Rod get back to his report, but I wanted to pause. Andy, I see your hand. I'm going to let Rod finish. Go ahead, Rod. Thank you.
Thank you. And so on matters slightly closer to home for me, the town manager's office continues to be, as you can imagine, extremely busy. We are still working on finding potential candidates for the project manager position and imagining what the scope of that position is going to be. And it's not yet advertised the zoning administrator position just because of the time constraints for the last 2 weeks have prevented me from actually shaping that. So I hope to be able to get to that also at some point next week. And so I think most of the rest of my contribution will come in following items to do with the police and fire budgets. As you can imagine, that's been a focus of our interest for the last week or so. Okay.
That's great. Any other questions for Rod? Great. Thanks so much for all your work on that update. Andy, I see that you put your hand down. Is that right, or do you have a public comment?
Oh, I was just going to say, if I may, Andy Scher, 23 Hazen Street. Having lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I just want to say there is precedent for that the town or the city of Cambridge contracted out with private contractors for their snow plowing. So it does happen even in cities like, greater Boston area. So thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break now, right on schedule. Ooh, that's great. And we'll come back at 7:30 with our budget conversations. So 5-minute break. Okay, I'm just waiting for Marcia to appear. Okay, so it is Wednesday, okay, it's 7:30. We're resuming the November 10th Select Board meeting. And we're going to begin talking about our budget, and the departments that we're discussing today are police and fire. So I'm going to actually turn to, before we get to Chief Keeling, I'm going to ask Rod, very didactically, what are we doing this evening? What are we not doing this evening? And how are we going to be doing it? And then we'll turn it over to our department heads.
Thanks, Roger. So, hello again, everyone. So, as you remember from our previous budget discussions, up until now, we've been looking at the budget from a overview standpoint, talking about the certain key issues with the budget, such as the predicted COLA increase, the impact of inflation, the relationship between the operating budget and the capital budget, and other kind of bigger questions, more general questions. And tonight we taking a dive into the more particular issues of two of our larger departments' budgets. And so what's also important about these two departments is that they have specific technical needs with regard to equipment, which means that they have complex and long-term capital funding commitments. So in working with the department heads, Fielding and I have developed operating budgets that maintain the same level of service, which is one of the commitments that we also made earlier in the budget review season. And what we've done is, for the sake of building this budget this year, which is fairly late in the calendar, is just to work with the assumption that it's exactly the same level of service. So what that means, baked into that the statement, is that it's the same commitment to the same set of equipment that each one of these departments uses to fulfill their functions. So we've not taken a step to add equipment, remove equipment, or to add capital commitments or remove capital commitments. We've simply worked with the set of assumptions that we've been handed, which is last year's budget. And we've asked the department heads to be respectful of the process to the extent that no one's proposing a new service or a new feature that would require new equipment or new staff. So that's the definition of level service budgeting. What we're doing here tonight is looking at the operating budget for both these departments, and then we're looking at the commitment to the designated funds from the proposed operating budget of FY23, in particular for the next 2 years. So that would be FY24 and FY25. And then we know that we've given you a capital plan that goes out 5 years, and of course the capital plan goes even further than that in reality. But what we were trying to do is to get you to focus on the that nexus between the operating budget and the capital budget, specifically with regard to making allocations to designated funds. And so if we were to engage in a broader, deeper discussion about town services and town operations, in the knowledge that we were going to change some commitments that would be reflected in the capital plan, that's not necessarily tonight is not that moment. That would be a different moment in the select board calendar. We're working on just trying to nail down the FY23 operating budget. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to Acting Chief Keeling, and if that's okay with Roger, and then we can start the presentation, I guess.
That's great, and I've enabled folks to share their screen. And welcome, Chief. I understand you have a little bit of a presentation for us, and then what we'll do is we'll ask questions of clarity about your presentation, and then we'll probably.
Very good. Can everybody hear me for a start?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to preface what I have to say with the slight possibility that if I get a call, I'll have to unfortunately leave. There's only me on duty this evening. So I shall attempt to present as much information that I've got in the time that I have allotted to me. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please feel free to raise a hand. I'm looking at sharing my screen. I've not done this before with Zoom, so please bear with me while I do this. But what I'd like to do is share a small presentation that I've had a chance to work on this afternoon. While we're going through the presentation, I'd like to refer to initially the operational budget page that's in your select board packets. If you have that open, at least you'll be able to follow on as I go through each part of the budget. There are 6 parts to the operational budget, and I'd like to spend a bit of time talking to each. Obviously, if you have questions, then please feel free to leap in at any point in time, and I'll attempt to address those with both Fielding and Rod's assistance. So without further ado, if I can try to share my screen with you. There we go. Right, can everybody see my screen okay? Okay. So without further ado, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to speak to you. Rod, Fielding and I have been working over the figures for the past few weeks. And what we've done is we've attempted to crystallize the best way forward for the department as it stands. Some of you may know that over the past year, we've had a bit of change in terms of staffing, and I'd like to speak to that very briefly as a preface to the figures that we'll talk to in very short order. Currently, the police department is staffed with 3 full-time officers. So 3 out of the 4 positions that we normally have are filled at this time. Last year, unfortunately, we lost 2 of our part-time officers, which affected our resilience. I only have 1 part-time officer working at the moment. So the 3 shifts that we have to ensure operational delivery are staffed by those current 3 full-time officers, which presents a few issues if an officer is on training, if they're on leave, or if they're ill for whatever reason. We have an administrative assistant and dispatcher, whom you'll know as Judy Powell, and we're currently employing 3 crossing guards, Demo, Debbie and Tracy, who do a fantastic job keeping our crossings safe for the children at Marion Cross School in the mornings and the afternoons. And just to give you an idea of the service level that the police department is currently fulfilling, for last financial year, we had a total of just under 2,300 incidents. So those are logged calls. Just a fairly mixed bag. Some of those calls are generated externally, some of them are generated by officers themselves. But what I thought was quite interesting was that it was an increase over the year before by not an insubstantial margin of just under 20%. We've also been doing reasonably well keeping our streets safe. Of the 934 traffic stops that we did in last year, we issued a reasonable amount of tickets, but as you can see from the figures here, more warnings were given out than traffic tickets. I and my officers believe that education is very important in terms of road safety rather than just penalising people. I like to work with people, give them a chance, and ensure that our roads are kept free, but also kept a happy place if possible. So I think the figures there bear out that we are patrolling. We are stopping people when they need to be spoken to. And I think that we're doing it in a fair and equitable way. So moving on to our figures. My first slide, as far as operational budget is concerned, deals with the public safety facility, which is the building that is shared between the fire and police departments. Those departments effectively share part of the budgetary figures. My department here, as you can see from the operational budget, if you look at the first section, public safety facility, deals with a number of line items that are fairly self-explanatory. There have been very few changes of late, but those that have changed, I just want to mention here for your information and just to put a bit of a complexion on why those changes have occurred. We've seen electricity price increases, and I'm informed that SolarFlex pricing has been the reason for those increases, not something that unfortunately we've had any say or any control over. As far as our administrative costs with regard to internet and telephone are concerned, we have one supplier, which is Comcast. The police department currently makes use of 4 business lines, one fax line. The fire department makes use of one phone line and also cable TV. The internet provision is a business package which has been chosen for 2 very important reasons. The first is for security. We have static IP addresses. I shan't get into too much detail, but they ensure the safety and the security of our IT systems. But also business internet, which provides a bit more reassurance when we have to depend on our IT links. The business internet is a bit more dependable than the average residential line. So obviously we have to pay a little more for those. A bit further down in the budget, there's a repairs and maintenance line, which unfortunately has been the subject of an increase over the last financial year. The public safety building's a new building, and as with most new buildings, there are a number of teething troubles. We've seen those in the shape of the septic system, heating the building in winter. There have been a number of calls for lighting work to be done, and we also had a flood, which was fortunately dealt with very swiftly, and we mitigated an awful lot of potential damage, but there was a cost associated with that. And lastly, the other major increase in this area is to do with the alarm monitoring line item, where we normally assume that that was to do with our security alarm system and fire alarm system. The line item also encapsulated inspections by Vermont Life Safety, which is a contract that comes and makes sure that our fire alarm provision, our fire extinguishers, and all of the ancillary equipment are up to spec. Those inspections were required by the town manager's office. They had a large cost implication, unfortunately, and that was the reason for the increase in that particular line item. I'd just like to pause there and ask if there are any questions about this particular section before we move on.
Do folks have any questions about the line items relating to the public safety facility? We'll get into right now questions of clarity or informational questions and then discussion.
I have one, Roger.
Okay.
Just in terms of septic out of public safety, I think we learned last year, late in the winter, that there was a dip in the sort of the waistline headed out to the septic field. And I'm wondering if that has already been corrected or not. If that work has been done, if not, is it part of this budget? Like, what's the status of that?
I think that's a question for Rod, perhaps. So do you have an answer to that
I
question?
do not have an answer. I'll make a note of that and try and get the answer from there.
Rod,
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other folks have informational questions? I see Rob's hand. Go ahead.
Yeah. The alarm monitoring line item and the inspections, is that expected to be a repeating cost?
It
And if
is
so,
yes.
annually or?
The inspections that were carried out last year, I understand, were the first of their kind. What I would like to make sure of is that if we have to do this on an annual basis, then we perhaps find a more manageable way of doing so. To be honest with you, the VLS inspections weren't something that I required or asked for, at least from my perspective. But going forward, what I'd like to ensure is that any inspections that are carried out are done when they're needed to be done, but also done as cost effectively as we can manage. I don't know if there were any other tenders or any other bids that were accepted by the town other than the potential bid submitted by VLS, but that's something we can certainly look at.
Okay, Marcia, I see your hand.
I don't think that this might not be something you can answer, Chief, but it looks like the budgeted and actual expenses are wildly different for that line item. Do you have a sense of why that is?
Is there a specific agenda item or just in general, or a line item or just in general, right?
The alarm monitoring that we're discussing. I'm just wondering, you know, the chief doesn't seem to think it's necessary, but it's also, you know, budgeted for $210 and the actual was $1,400. That's a huge jump.
It was a huge jump, yes. It certainly bears further looking at. It's not something that I can really speak to at the moment, but I will certainly work with Rod and with Fielding and find out if we can either bring down the cost or change the way that these inspections are done. I don't know if there was any fallout from the inspections. There certainly wasn't, at least from the PD's point of view. But it's certainly something we can look at.
Okay, Mary, you have your hand up.
It's a question about, we have a Comcast account, and I'm not really clear whether we ever investigated the possibility of, for instance, EC fiber or an alternative to Comcast. So I don't know if that's possible or was done, but a little history on that would be good at some point.
Okay, so unless there are any other, I know this is a concern that Claudette has raised, so unless there are any questions, we're going to have Rod address sort of the telephone and internet and the phone lines and the business internet, all those questions I'm going to give to Rod to answer, if that's okay. So, Rod, do you want to touch base on that a little bit, and where sort of what is diagnose the problem for us on that, and then what can we do this budget year to sort of resolve it? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Roger. So very quickly, because I'm concerned about being able to get through the amount of material that we have for tonight. The phone system and phone lines that the town has and it continues to pay for have grown over the years, and Fielding and I have taken on a task which we have not had time to pursue it yet, but we're on the task of reviewing the number of phone lines for Tracy Hall, the long distance and local providers for that phone service. And the same goes for the public safety building and the public works building. And then the internet is related to that. We have so-called municipal Comcast at this building, and as Simon pointed out, we have business Comcast for the public safety department building. We will look to review that. There was a cost comparison provided by Herb Durfee last year that indicated that for equivalent service as we currently have, switching to EC Fiber would cost somewhere in the vicinity of $30 extra a month, and that was, close to $600. We would look to reduce the number of phone lines, both at the public safety building and at this building, in recognition of the fact that the phone lines are used less because of email. And we would look to improve and increase the quality and bandwidth for the internet connection in recognition of the fact that we don't talk on the phone anymore, we email and we use the web. And that's the way it's going to continue to grow. And we will look to getting rid of multiple vendors. I think we're currently at 3 or 4 vendors just for the different kinds of phone calls you could possibly make, and try and work with a local provider to get some cost savings there. So I just want to note for everybody that if we could skip talking about the phone bill until we get some more information, where we recognize that there's some issues, and we recognize that it turns up in individual departments' budgets in unforeseen and uncomfortable ways. We want to try and resolve that. Lastly, I'll make the statement here right now. Given that you can get television on your smartphone, we won't, if we can avoid it, be paying for cable TV in any town facility. If it turns out that one of these providers bundles cable TV with other things, and that's the best price option that we can get, we probably will end up maintaining cable TV, but it won't be because we want it or are paying for it.
You can't play CNN in the lobby up to your office.
I wouldn't play CNN in the lobby of the office, but yeah, okay. And so it's not an option that I'm bemoaning the absence of.
Okay.
So there you go. Yeah. So, and then actually there was a question about the septic system, I think from Mary. I'll check into that, Mary. I understand that there was a repair. I don't know if it's a continuing issue or not yet.
Okay, thank you.
So let's move on to the chief alluded to sort of 6 sections. So this might be section 1. So let's move on. Hey, Marcia, I can't see your hands because of Zoom, and we have a shared screen. But go ahead, ask your question.
Sorry. The question is just about the electricity. We may be bound with a contract with SolarFlect, but at one point in 20, our actual cost nearly doubled. And it's definitely doubled since 2019. So I'd like to keep an eye on that because I think that's concerning.
Yeah, and this was a sort of an unresolved question from last year from her. So I'll dig into my email and forward them onto Rod so we can get some resolution.
Thank you.
Fielding, I see your hand up. Do you want to clarify anything that we were discussing?
Thanks, Roger. I just wanted to point out here, you're going, as we kind of go through these conversations, utilities, you're going to see consistent increases in these budget lines. This is one of, in our previous conversations, we've talked about the effects of inflation and how they'll show up in this year's proposed budget. Utilities are going to be one of those primary line items that you're going to see those effects. So electricity, petroleum products, heating, fuel, those type of items, you'll see consistent increases across the board.
Great, good reminder, thank you. Let's turn it back. Oh, I see Claudette, you have your hand up, go ahead. Thank you for using the Zoom, board members. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to also point out the heat pump. The installation of the heat pump at the public safety facility was also another reason for the electric increase.
Heat generator, right?
No, the heat pump.
I thought it was a generator, but we'll look back for sure. Oh, I see what you're saying. You're not talking about, okay, sorry, I understand. But yes, thank you, Claudette. That would explain electricity for sure. Thank you. So that answers Marcia's question more directly, but we'll look into it. Thank you. So let's move on. How about that? Go ahead, Chief. Thank you for.
Thank you. Okay, so the next section that I'm going to speak to is the police department wages and benefits, the large chunk that follows the first. Ideally, this really doesn't change very much. We have had some increases due to COLA, some step increases over time. We are in the fortunate position of hiring a full-time officer. My new community safety officer is joining next week, and I've managed to find a part-time officer who is fully trained and who is able to address some of the resilience shortfall that we've got at the moment. The full-time officer is going to be starting at his entry level, and our part-time officer pay rate is significantly less than the overtime rate that my officers would normally be rewarded with if they're going to be covering other shifts. So I expect to see very little change in terms of wages and benefits over the next financial year. There's been a minor restructuring. You'll see the line item there for part-time officer wage is zeroed out. We're going to be factoring that into the normal police officer wage. Fielding has got some views about that. It's largely an administrative decision rather than anything else. And as far as the rest of it is concerned, because those wages and benefits are set contractually, there is very little really that I can speak to that makes any real change. Any questions at all on this section?
I saw Claudette's hand. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, Chief Keeling, I'm wondering, is this full-time officer, is that the temporary full-time?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Marcia. You're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't understand what you were saying, Chief, about the part-time officer being zeroed out.
The line item for part-time officer. We've historically had the part-time officer wage. If you have a look on your sheet there, it's historically hovered around, let me see, the financial year 21 budget was $5,000. The financial year 22 budget was $3,000. Our request for financial year 23 is $0. We're effectively factoring that into normal police officer wages.
Okay, thank you.
So can, I guess that wasn't clear to me actually. So because it's just sort of Fielding, can I ask just a little bit clarification from Fielding, because it sounds like it came from his recommendation. Can you just explain a little bit? So it's the part-time wage is zeroed out because if we have part-time officers, we're just drawing from a full-time salary line. Is that what I'm hearing?
Effectively, in an effort, the part-time officer would be offsetting, police officer wages in effect, by them working. A full-time officer is not. They're effectively doing the same job. And so I thought it was better reflected to have those be in the same bucket, so to speak, or the same line item. It has been accommodated for. I did push that $3,000 into the police officer wage line item. I think it makes a little bit more sense there as opposed to separating it out. It is effectively just an administrative, on paper change. I'm not necessarily wed to it, but it seemed to be a little clearer for me there.
Marcia has a question, and then I have a question. Go ahead, Marcia.
Well, I'm just concerned because prior to your tenure, Fielding, we've had a lot of concern about how many full-time people we had, how many part-time people we had, and people in town want to know that. And I think that this might blur those lines so that it's harder to track.
And that
In
was
other
sort
words,
of-
I think it's important.
That was effectively my question. I'd wondered, that's my feedback too. Okay, so procedurally, the way that this is working is Rod is taking notes and Fielding is tracking things in a document, and we're all, everything's being documented for future work. So we'll let the chief get back to his presentation. Go ahead, chief.
Thank you very much. Just remembering to unmute myself. I'm terrible at this. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Community policing. As far as this is concerned, there has been quite a lot of money spent on the animal control line item. This has been brought up before. It's chiefly an expense, not something that the police department really has any control over, but an expense that is largely seen through vet services. We've had a lot of bills for stray cats that have been handed into the River Road vet surgery, and the majority of the costs are actually incurred through that avenue. As far as the other two changes, the speed signs, the speed signs around town continue to be funded. Personally, I would like to look into changing the way that we monitor speed, the way that we draw attention to people speeding in town. And I believe that there are more cost-effective ways of doing this. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance really to look very deeply into the topic. But what I have gathered, at least on the surface, is that we can do an awful lot of what we want to do with a lot less cost, simply by having more mobile solutions, not necessarily a speed cart, but mobile signs that are either battery or solar powered, that don't have an ongoing draw of electricity, which is what the current signs have. So it's something I should be certainly looking into. And also lastly, the cadet program, Chief Frank, when she moved to Windsor, took the cadet program with her. It originally came from Windsor. We no longer have the resources or the capability of managing a similar program here at Norwich. So the cadet program has been discontinued.
Okay, any questions on these line items? Marcia, go ahead.
Not a question, but a concurrence. I agree. I would like to see some investigation about alternate speed signs and ways to save money there and be more productive.
Absolutely.
Similarly, I would say there may or may not be things that can be done in an animal control ordinance. Like obviously cats are not discussed in our ordinance, but we care for them nonetheless. So, so if there's insight or recommendations to be had that are budgetary, I'm open to it, right? So anyway, I'm sure you've had those conversations nonetheless. So that's what I'll say. We provide services that are not covered in our existing law. Go ahead, Marcia, you have your hand up.
I just think it's interesting that the police department has to shoulder the cost of the animal control. Maybe there's a better place for it to live.
Yes, I think that's one of those public questions, right? Go ahead, Mary, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just in terms of animal control, I believe there's a state law that says that the animals have to be held for 10 days. So that would be sort of over overriding our, or superseding our animal ordinance. So just saying. And I think they have to be held for 10 days. I believe they have to have a rabies shot. And other than that, I don't think there's any specific requirement. But if they're held, then it's a matter of also paying the board for the animals for 10 days.
Okay, let's move on. Go ahead, 4, operational 4, right?
I'm sorry, hang on. There we go. The next area that we need to cover is equipment and maintenance. There have been some costs with regard to the radio maintenance line, as evidenced in the expenditure, or rather the request that you see in front of you. We spent historically around 800 in the, or rather we budgeted 800 in financial year 21, spent 500 of that last year. We're looking at maintaining that sort of level because of the radios that we do have. We do have rather old kit, unfortunately. I've had to renew batteries, antennas, and the like. It is unfortunately a necessary evil, upkeeping the older equipment. But as you'll see further down, when we start talking about capital budget, there is a solution that we might consider, and that is the replacement of these older radios. And as far as the cruiser video equipment is concerned, that certainly is a concern. We do have very old cruiser video systems that have proved unreliable. The video systems are relied upon when officers go to traffic court, because the cruiser video systems effectively provide an overwatch for traffic offences. They provide recording whenever an officer is doing field sobriety tests at the roadside, when we stop drivers that may be intoxicated through drink or drugs. That equipment, unfortunately, has not been available in a number of cases now due to audio shortfalls. And also because the court can no longer, unfortunately, process information on discs. What I'm proposing is that we go to a subscription-based model that provides body-worn cameras for the officers. The benefits are that instead of having to buy servers and storage for all of the data, we use existing and tried and tested methods for uploading the footage from the cameras to the cloud, where it is held securely and can be called upon simply by sharing a link to the file over the internet, something that the courts are actually actively using. So replacing the computer video equipment is something that I think is very important. Not only does it provide a good record of police interactions, it provides safety and security not only for town employees but also for members of the public. There is a statewide policy that has been drafted and accepted that governs the use of these body-worn cameras, and that statewide policy has been accepted by the Vermont ACLU, given that it's not just a set of guidelines, but it's a way of using these body-worn cameras in such a way as to preserve the integrity of the footage, to ensure that no illicit surveillance is carried out, but also that the footage is used equitably and fairly by officers and the public alike. So instead of going back to a discussion that we had some time ago about body-worn cameras purchasing servers, purchasing storage space and the like. What we'd like to move towards is a subscription-based model, which is an awful lot more affordable and can be held under the operational budget rather than the capital budget. So that would explain the increase in the cruiser video equipment line. So moving on, we've got a line item as well there for cruiser maintenance. The older cruisers that we have are the two sedans. We've got EQ1 and EQ4. EQ1 is the operational marked sedan, EQ4 is the unmarked. Both vehicles are the same age. They were incorporated into service in 2013. Both of them are very high mileage. As a result of their use and their length of service, both have become quite expensive to maintain. The items that are being replaced are wear items to do with steering, suspension, brakes. Unfortunately, these repairs are becoming more and more costly each year. What I would like to do is replace both of those older vehicles, EQ1 and EQ4, with hybrid vehicles. The old EQ3, which you may remember was the old SUV that we had, was replaced with the new EQ3, which is the hybrid vehicle that a lot of you have seen around town. That vehicle is tremendously reliable. It is very effective. I've had very little problems with it mechanically. And looking recently at historical figures that I've managed to obtain from the fuel pumps, I was surprised to see that the hybrid is using a lot less fuel than the old SUV. And I believe that we'll be able to realize these savings if we move to a fleet of hybrid vehicles and replace those older vehicles that I've just mentioned that are costing more and more to the town each year. The last item that has seen an increase in this section is cruiser supplies. We've kitted out vehicles with helmets per the bargaining agreement. That covers it as far as this section is concerned. Marsha, I see your hands up.
So just board members, I want to talk about cruisers when we get to capital. So if you have a cruiser question, hold on to it. But if folks have other questions, then go ahead. Go ahead, Marsha.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. My question is about the video equipment, and it looks like the chain of custody issues are not really issues for the court because they're happy with that. That's what I'm understanding. But in terms of access, I'm wondering, because that was a concern of people when we had discussions previously about cameras. In terms of access, once you've uploaded this to the cloud, is it there or can it be pulled down and manipulated?
It can't be manipulated. No data can be changed. The only thing that I would envisage is the possibility perhaps of redacting certain parts of the video feed. And there are a number of reasons for that. But the policy that has been adopted statewide, and this is incidentally the policy that had to be authored for the Vermont State Police, ensures that the data that are uploaded are not misused. To give you an example of misuse, if, for instance, I was required to document an incident, I would not be able to write my first account of that document or that incident by simply reviewing the footage and going off that basis. An officer is required to write down their initial account of the incident, and then if need be, they can go back and look at the footage, and the footage is there as an independent record of the officer's account. So any misuse is effectively dealt with by the upload process, which is not dependent on the officer, and also the retrieval process, which is governed by a number of policies and procedures.
Okay, thank you. And just follow up about Are there maintenance fees, or because it's in the cloud, there aren't?
No, the good thing about this is it's a subscription-based system. So the subscription covers the hardware, the maintenance of that hardware, the replacement of any systems that may develop faults or run to the end of their service life, and all of the storage is effectively rolled up into one particular fee. The good thing about this is there are a number of suppliers that we've approached. The figures are pretty much similar, which is good. And both suppliers have already got a presence in Vermont. I have direct experience through working at Hartford PD with one of those suppliers. And I know from experience with the Vermont State Police, and also through conversations that I've had with Chief Frank over at Windsor PD, that the alternative system is just as good and reliable.
Thank you very much.
Any other hands? So the only thing I would say, like I would like some more information about the cruiser video equipment before. I would like some more information, like what is the name of the subscription? What does it mean to have a third-party private entity sort of running things of matters of public interest? So I'm not so certain. I know that there was a model policy being recommended to the legislature, but I wasn't sure of the outcome. So I would also appreciate having time to understand the policy and sort of things that the department might be willing to accommodate in terms of a local policy. I would like to continue that conversation as a policy matter, if I may. So certainly I would like more information about what is the company and what are the model policies that are being referenced. I would appreciate that work. Yeah, that's all. Any other? And then the only thing too is, I'll just say rhetorically that it's deeply unfortunate that our collective bargaining agreement makes space for military-grade tactical shields and ballistic helmets. Go ahead, Marcia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that it would be helpful to us probably if the chief could find any documentation from the courts, because I know courts have, when I was practicing, they were a little bit reluctant to do anything electronically, and that's changed over time slowly. So there must be some court rules or procedures that perhaps you could get for us that would document the court's acceptance of these things and what in particular, because they may have some standards. So those would be instructive for us.
Right, I think we would like just some more information, but I think we appreciate you referencing and hearing our earlier conversations on this, right, and being responsive to and noting them, right? I think that's appreciated. I see, Andy, I'm going to take public comment at the end of the budget presentation. Thank you, I see your hand. Anything else, or can we ask our chief to advance to the next slide?
Certainly, thank you. The last part is really quite quick. Under the support area, very little change in this regard, other than that I had to spend a little more on uniforms than I'd anticipated. I had to outfit 2 full-time officers last year, as Officer Pregent and Officer Berry. My new full-time officer will have some equipment that needs to be fitted to him. I believe I can offset some of that cost because we receive a grant for bulletproof vests. And my part-time officer needs a few items to complete her collection, not onerous, but it is still an increase that needs to be taken into account. As far as designated funds were concerned, this does touch upon the matter of cruisers. So what I'd like to do is briefly mention it here, and maybe have that in your mind before we take our break and segue into the capital budget section. No funding was added last financial year to either of the two designated funds for the police department. So what we would like to do is request 5,000 for special equipment and 35,000 for the cruiser fund. Both designated funds have been funded in the past to the tune of effectively half that amount for special equipment, so 2,500 each year, and 20,000 a year for the cruiser fund. What we're asking for in terms of the cruiser fund is an outfitting replacement for the chief's vehicle. And instead of asking for a cruiser, what we intend to do is ask for a hybrid vehicle, an unmarked, of course. It shan't be used as a cruiser, but it will be used for various tasks associated with the department. Witness transport, for instance, taking officers to training courses, and also being used as a chief's vehicle. So that is something that we'd like to put in front of the select board for consideration. So that effectively brings the end of my operational budget presentation.
That's great. Thanks so much. And so let's go. I'm going to stop the sharing of the screen right now. And so I think there's a couple of things that we said that we would like some more information on, which Rod has noted for us. Do any board members have any, not only questions at this point, but discussion matters or concerns or modifications that they would like to request on the operating budget for this? And so Rod, and then we'll get into a discussion of the capital and cruisers. So Rod can actually share his screen so we can actually look at all the line items, and he can sort of highlight as we go. So Rod's going to share his screen, and then I see Claudette's hand. So let's do that. Is that okay, Rod? Does that make sense? Yes. Okay.
Okay. Everyone now see that? So the big advance here tonight is that when I move the cursor around, it's a highlighted yellow box.
Ooh.
So we should be able to locate ourselves pretty quickly. And then I'm hoping that all of you can see at least the column identifiers. So alphabetically, we're starting at F and we're running through. Well, don't worry. Each has a distinct letter. They're obviously no longer in alphabetical order, but let's just not worry about that. And then you should be able, if you've got very good glasses, be able to make out the row number on the far left of your screen. But anyway, why don't we start just with questions that are specific to line items?
Glad I saw your hand. Do you want to dive in for us?
My actual question is just a comment, or actually it's a combination of both. We had discussions last year that our cruiser fleet was going to be reduced from 4 to 3, especially when the maintenance costs of the worst car seem to be getting out of hand. And so I'm just curious as why there's no discussion about cutting that fleet to 3.
So let's get to cruisers. I appreciate that, Claudette, because I asked. There's a thought process to that, because I asked. I remember that discussion. But and I'm sorry to back us up, because this is now the time, right? We have the benefit of our department head here. And I won't push it, because it seems like maybe, this is ultimately the same level of services are expected this year. But I want to make sure that outside of some of the matters that need more research or sort of some questions around the subscription-based body cameras, everything else doesn't require further discussion or even critique, right? That's why we're here. Marcia, I see your hand up. and then we'll get to cruisers.
I just wanted to reiterate, I think it is important to distinguish between the full-time and part-time officers. I don't know if other people agree with that, but it was such a huge discussion and people were so concerned about it. I think it is important to keep those separate. And I can understand Fielding's sensible suggestion to put them all in one bucket, but I think just people in town have a different opinion, and I respect that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, what do other board members think? I also said, I think it could add clarity to the discussion, and we'll kick it back to Fielding and Rod to either defend their decision or have a subsequent meeting, or to make the change. Do board members feel strongly one way or another? I'm seeing no from Claudette. I'm seeing Rob saying no, and Mary saying no. So you have two, which is not a quorum, but two people. See what you do with that, folks. Rob and
we'll break it back out again.
Okay. Any other board members with questions around the operating budget that was proposed?
Can I quickly go through the list so that just everyone?
Yeah, so let me take Andy Shear's public comment, and then Rod's going to go through the list of things that we discussed, and then we'll move on to cruisers. Okay. Go ahead, Andy.
Right. For taking my comment, Andy Shear, 23 Hazen Street. I would just like to state to Police Chief Keeling, you know, I would urge you to work with the town in designing, building, engineering spaces that are actually going to reduce the speed of traffic. So in the midst of this staffing crisis that we have spaces and other ways to manage that traffic problem of speeding or what have you. If we do a better job with creating the spaces that can then be safer for people, it reduces the amount of work that the police will need to respond to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. So it sounds like folks, so Rod's going to go through his list, and then that he's noted for us for continued, feedback, and then we'll move on to cruisers. Okay.
Okay. So there's questions about the electricity bill, why it's so high, why there's been increases. There were questions about the alarm monitoring function and the role of Vermont life safety field testing as part of that, and why would that continue, or what that issue is given the dramatic increase on that line item. So we'll follow up on those questions. There was the observation from Marsha and Roger with regard to the part-time officer line, and not being merged with the full-time officer line. So we're going to break that back out. There were questions about alternative speed signs from Marsha, and then there were questions about animal control and that budget line item and what can be done about that, which gave rise to some policy questions, which would be outside the response from Fielding and I. But we all just want to state for the record that we are supporters of companion animals. And then Mary suggested that cats need to be held for 10 days. So we'll figure out what the statutory obligations are, what the budgetary implications are of those statutory obligations, and then we'll move forward with that.
That's great.
And then there were questions about the body cam, cloud-based body cam system company. The way that private company would interface with the public interest with regard to storing of data and accessing of data, and then related questions from Marsha with regard to the suitability of that system with regard to the court's ability to use that data. So we'll follow up on some of those. I would highlight that they're primarily outside the scope of the budgetary discussion, except for the fact that if we're going to go with this vendor, people need to be comfortable that this vendor is providing a service in a manner that's acceptable to the town. So that would be the one question there. And then lastly, so that's it. And then aside from the cruiser discussion, which we're about to have, I think. So if there are any other points that I missed, let me know.
Did any board members? I see Claudette's hand. Go ahead, Claudette.
Sorry, I have a little bit of a concern that because the body camera piece is rolled into the operational budget, that it removes the select board from any discussion about whether or not we want to go that route. Because there would not need to be any spending authorization. So that's just a concern I have.
Yes.
Well, I think that's a good question to raise. I think that we can provide you with the background information that you need and asking about this potential vendor. The next step would be that if you were comfortable with this review that we do of the vendor, then presumably this line item in the budget would remain the same.
Yes.
And then you would, through the process of a purchase order and the AP warrant, see that we've made a contractual commitment to this vendor. If you're unhappy with the vendor, then we could seek an alternate vendor, and that might more likely take the form of additional expense, because we would then be taking on the responsibility of storing the data on site or renting cloud space to store that data. And so you would see a different budget presentation, and it would have potentially different issues associated with it. It may fall into the capital budget if it involved significant equipment purchase outlays, but I guess we'd need to see that, and so then you'd still be reviewing that and making a decision about that. In a related way, it's within your purview as a select board to have a policy discussion with regard to the use of body cams and the appropriate protocols for doing that. You might contemplate that discussion, which presumably would involve acting chief Keeling, would reach a conclusion that would likely have budgetary implications. I don't know what the briefest period of time there is to sign a contract with this provider, and then I think that there's issues if you go with this provider and then switch out of it, it's going to be difficult to make that transition out. So I feel like time is compressed here around a very important policy question that does have budgetary implications. We can try, when I say we, acting chief Keeling, myself, and Fielding can try and break out those questions and issues for you and come back to you with the necessary information. But I want to flag that in the context of it being November, middle-ish November, we don't have a lot of time to make these kinds of decisions within the context of the budget. By saying that, I'm not trying to add pressure and I'm just saying we're going to have to find time to have this discussion because it's an important one.
I think if you sort of help us structure the considerations, given the need for efficiency, I think that would be helpful. I think to the extent it's a policy question, we will need to have this policy. We will have to have that. But I think we need to benefit from an understanding of the budgetary implications of whatever policy directives we have. And then, as the chief alluded to, this is a little, there might be some other legislative pressure these may be a mandate. And so it's just somewhat, and to sort of also be forward thinking and to sort of accept the inevitability of that as well. So I think if you help us, that would be appreciated.
Okay, great, thank you.
Does that help, Claudette? A little. We're not all satiated.
We're in a very difficult place with this one, and I understand the reluctance to commit to a vendor without thinking through all these really important questions, and I appreciate the questions.
Yes, and then I see Marcia's hand, and then I'll ask again the same question, and then we'll get to cruisers. Go ahead, Marcia. You're on mute.
Sorry. Just in the packet of information that would be of use to us, in addition to what the court has said about these kinds of services, it would be nice to have what the ACLU has said about these kinds of services. And particularly if anybody is citing the one service that you've identified. I think this is probably going to be something that, you know, if you're in the 21st century, we have to do this and we have to protect everybody. So there has to be a good solution.
I can send some materials to Rod, and I also have correspondence from government operations, whatever that committee is, from the legislature.
Okay.
Okay. Are we ready to talk cruisers? Okay. All right.
Are people benefiting from the particular spreadsheet up, or would they prefer to see each other's faces in more detail? We can eliminate this and switch in and out of it. It's up to you.
Well, I think now we can see each other's faces because we sort of know what we're talking about. Okay.
How's that?
So Claudette basically said, last year there was how has the conversation changed from last year? What are the internal conversations that folks have been, that you all have been having around cruisers, and why is the recommendation is what it is?
Okay, let me frame it in these terms. So if you remember the opening remarks I made for this agenda item, it was, we operated with the assumption that we were maintaining the existing level of service. I feel like it's possible that I was not aware of this discussion of the cruisers being problematic last year, in the sense that some members of the select board feel as if that question didn't get resolved, or if it got resolved in a particular way, it's not your recollection that this year's budget represents the outcome of that process. And so in our putting together of the budget, it didn't come up for us as an issue that there was more than one answer to this question. It was there are a certain number of vehicles at the police department, and they're on a replacement schedule, and what are we going to do about that? The justification and the argument for maintaining the fleet at its existing size is that if the department is fully staffed, which is the continuing aspiration and expectation of both the acting chief and me as the interim town manager, and I would assume the select board, because we've not had a discussion about a reduction in force. So the assumption is that there's going to be a certain number of part-time officers and a certain number of full-time officers, and that they're going to need vehicle access to vehicles to do their work, and that in large part the police are car-bound. They do a large amount of their work by cruising. Moving forward from there, we did know that earlier this year, so this budget year, FY22, there was a request to purchase another police cruiser, and that request was denied by you as the select board. So there are funds available in the designated fund for that purchase. I think we're operating on the assumption that, given the lead time, the current lead time of being around 12 months for a police cruiser to be supplied, that we would encourage you as a select board to activate that request again and proceed with ordering another police cruiser, but this time ensuring that it's a hybrid. And then, so that would then mean that there were 3 viable vehicles and 2 older vehicles on the fleet, with an expectation that one would be removed, possibly sold, and then the third one would be non-operational vehicle. The justification for having 3 cruisers at any one time, like the smaller number of staff available to use the vehicles, is that if one vehicle is involved in an accident or is out of service for repairs, you still need 2 other vehicles to maintain your basic shift load with the officers on duty. And so the argument here, basically, is that there should be 3 cruisers to fulfill the demands of the department on any one day. And so then that becomes a question about the so-called chief's car, or what I would prefer probably to refer to as the non-operational vehicle. And as Acting Chief Keeling has already pointed out, the range of functions for that vehicle are different. It doesn't have to have a cage in the back to carry suspects or prisoners. It doesn't have to have a whole host of other items that would make it, that would qualify it as a cruiser. It could be a smaller vehicle and it could be more fuel efficient and perform tasks more heavily oriented towards the administration of the department and to fulfill other specific functions, and it would be an unmarked vehicle. And so the discussion there has been that when time comes, if the select board approves this this part of the capital budget for the cruisers for the police department, as it's submitted to you tonight, then this 4th vehicle would be, in fact, the non-operational vehicle, smaller and intentionally chosen to be more fuel efficient because it would be a hybrid, and so not a conventional police vehicle. So I'm sure that Acting Chief Keeling can give you more information, but I've been witness to these kinds of discussions about why police department fleets are significantly larger than the number of police officers that are on duty at any one time. And the most compelling argument is that, with close data tracking, is that having a slightly larger fleet than the minimal size allows one vehicle to basically be at rest while the other 2 are functioning. And that this actually extends the life of all 3 vehicles, and that if you reduce the fleet size by 1 in this case, remember we're talking about a very small department, so if you reduce the fleet size by 1 vehicle, it's a 30% reduction in the size of the fleet, or 25% reduction in the size of the fleet if it's got 4 vehicles. And that inevitably loads the other 2 vehicles with that extra work. It's not as if there'll be less miles traveled because there's less vehicles. You'll just be extracting more work out of the other vehicles, so they will wear out faster and they will cost more in repairs. And so the analysis that I've seen repeatedly, and it's fairly conclusive, is that having a larger fleet is actually cheaper to maintain in the long run than a smaller fleet, because the key factor is the total number of miles traveled in any one year is pretty much a given. It's static. And so it's a question of how many vehicles you're sharing that across.
And the replacement schedule that's being proposed here is 10 years for each car, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in this instance, that what we're actually looking at is a fairly extended life expectancy for vehicles used in this map.
Okay, do folks have any questions about this question? So I think what we're hearing now is Rod has sort of put forth the analysis that is often shared with him around sort of letting 1 car sort of rest because 2 are in use at any given time, and then the 3rd is sort of ready to be put into action, I suppose, when the other cars rest. So you always have this sort of 3rd car rotating into the mix. And so it seems like the one area that I hesitate to use the word. So if we believe that argument, or if we're okay with that argument, or if we accept that argument, then we could just shift to sort of this question of the non-operational car. So do folks share that analysis, or would like further conversation on that analysis around the operational cars? How's that? Marsha, I saw you unmute, but I see Claudette's hand, so go ahead, Claudette.
Prize goes to Claudette.
I'm not sure. I guess Since the proposal last year was to actually cut the fleet, and since we don't have anybody here to be able to answer the question, what were these arguments made at that time? Because they weren't when we were having our budget discussions about reducing the fleet.
Right.
Or that being part of the plan. Those arguments were not raised. So I hear what the arguments are, but that discussion, those conversations to reduce the fleet was when we were fully staffed. We were fully staffed at that, when those discussions were happening. So, it's, I guess it's, if one chief thought we could get by with 3 cars, it's, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Okay.
I don't know.
I think what is new information, then I'll turn to Marcia, is what's new in this discussion is we're seeing we're not explicitly discussing a replacement schedule, but we're seeing that's also a change. We're seeing 10 years, right? I think we were hearing in the past, actually the basis, I think the arguments have been, comparison of other departments as how often they sort of circulate through their cars. And so I'm actually surprised to see 10 years being proposed, because we were hearing, anywhere from 3 to 5 years as a proposal. So this is quite new, and I would hope that we would be committed to that, because that also reduces the allocations each year to our designated fund if we're committed to a 10-year replacement schedule. I do have questions on cruiser maintenance and how that relates, but let's get to Marcia's question.
Thank you. I'm just, I think I can be convinced with the arguments. I wasn't present last year, and I think we have a whole different cast of characters, and we don't exactly know where we're going in the future. But we do know that we always have vehicle problems. The only question I think I have is if we're anticipating purchasing some vehicles that have a hybrid component, and all of these costs seem to be the same, that seems to me odd. That my gut reaction would be that a hybrid would cost more, or that there'd be some difference.
So Rob can answer that, and then I see Fielding's hand. Go ahead.
So I think, and I'm guessing, it's a very rough number, but I think that the last time we purchased a cruiser, once it was fully fitted out as a cruiser, as an official police vehicle, it was close to $65,000, and it was a hybrid.
Yes.
It took 12 months to actually, from the point of order to the point where it turned up.
Yes, that's right.
I think that in informal discussions between the finance director Fielding and myself and acting chief Healing, the preferred solution was a hybrid RAV4 available today at White River Junction for $31,000. So, and which would require some modification, probably in the range of $2,000 to $3,000 to install radio and lights, and that's it. And then Acting Chief's observations anecdotally are that the current vehicle that he uses as a cruiser is a hybrid, and it's averaging around 21 miles to the gallon in heavy police use, which is to say its motor is on all the time for the shift, and he's getting 21 miles to the gallon, and that's significantly better, as in 15 or 20% better than the car replaced. And so the similar expectations are held out there for a small hybrid SUV, which would be even more economical than the cruiser. So both in maintenance costs and in operating costs, the expectation is that this would be a much cheaper vehicle.
Thank you.
Okay, Mary and Rob, we haven't heard your thoughts. So the question specifically was, do we agree with the analysis or have any further discussion or opinions around the analysis of the 3 operational cars?
I have a question. Can you give me a rough estimate of what percentage of the time 2 vehicles are in use on the road?
And turn that one over to Acting Chief Keeling.
Yes, and
Acting Chief Keeling, yeah.
And are there 2 officers on patrol at the same time? Are 2 cars used at the same time? In addition to, are they on the road at the same time?
At the moment, no. We have, as I said before, lower staffing than we normally have. So consequently, there is only 1 officer on duty at once. Historically, that hasn't always been the case. So the chief at the moment is actually holding down 2 jobs. I'm holding down the officer job as well as the chief's job. Ordinarily, there'll be 2. Ordinarily, there'll be 2 vehicles potentially running around town during the day. Depending on shift rotation and other special duties, it is more than likely that 2 vehicles can be used concurrently. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that 3 vehicles could be used concurrently, because officers occasionally need to travel to training courses. Officers occasionally need to do extracurricular investigations that require journeys to places beyond our normal purview. So it is perfectly possible that 3 of those vehicles could be in use concurrently. And that could be 3 cruisers, or it could be 2 cruisers and an unmarked. It really depends, but at the moment, no, it's just me during the day and my evening or nighttime officer running around in another cruiser at night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question and answer. Mary, do you have any thoughts at this time? You're on mute.
Getting a little lost in the discussion between the staffing shortage and the aging vehicles and the desire to have hybrids. So I don't know if it's wise to, I like the argument of having the fleet being slightly larger. It's just an odd time to make that decision with staffing shortages, with wanting to have the energy efficiency. And I think the maintenance schedule got thrown off with that arson incident way back. So I don't know if there's really a rational replacement schedule. So I'm a little lost in the arguments.
Okay, so let's.
And you don't need to go through them again. Okay, I've heard them enough for tonight.
No, I understand, Mary. Thank you. I think I'm going to turn to Fielding I think he's probably going to address the replacement schedule. And then I am going to the whole point of these discussions is to be helpful to the folks who are crafting this budget for us. And I think this is as clear as mud, right? So we want to go back a little bit and provide some clear guidance. But I'm going to turn to Fielding.
Thanks, Roger. I did want to point out that the 2 vehicles we are looking to replace are 2013 model years. So we will be in effect hitting by the time we are able to replace them, we will be hitting that 10-year replacement schedule already with existing equipment, which I would be able to, foresee us hitting again for this concurrent replacement. As you said, that does have some distinct effects in terms of the amount we would have to save in concurrent years to replace these eventual vehicles. And it becomes a little bit more affordable on an annual basis in terms of allocating funding to those designated funds. I think Rod also raised a strong point that I wanted to highlight again, not only for Article 36 initiative reasons with the transition to hybrid technology, it also has substantial savings in terms of operational costs. The big one being the use of petroleum products, and I have taken that somewhat into effect in the proposed operating budget. By getting 21 miles to the gallon, that is a roughly 35% increase in fuel efficiency. So that has a substantial, cost savings in terms of the operational budget. It's also important to note that with the motor not running during, when I saw Chief Keeling on the road during school commute time this morning, instead of his, motor running and wearing, and that has costs and effects, it would be sitting there running on battery power. And you are going to see that in a reduced repair and maintenance line as well. So I did want to highlight those issues. At this point, I'll turn it back over though.
Okay, that's great. So I'm gonna just ask I'm just gonna sort of ask if anybody, I think it's unclear. So the question that I had asked was sort of the three operational and the rationale that has been provided for those three operational cars. It sounds, what my summary is, Mary has reflected that it's sort of, it's difficult to sort of follow all of the factors. Marcia seems to be in concurrence with what has been proposed. Claudette doesn't necessarily agree, but she doesn't necessarily disagree either. And Rob, I believe that you similarly don't necessarily have a strong opinion either way. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'd like to examine the possibility of reducing the fleet or putting into the mix something more radically fuel efficient, possibly something totally electric.
So this is I previewed this conversation with Rod, and it's all coming down. I expected a little. I confess, where Rod was in favor of an all-electrical model. Marcia and Mary would be generally in support of what was being recommended, and Claudette and I would be ambivalent.
So Roger, does that mean we can all go home?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to let that be the feedback, and I'm going to ask our staff to.
That's good.
Okay. So if there's nothing further, I would like to take a 5-minute break, and then we're over by a half an hour on our schedule, which means our fire department is with us later than they had anticipated. So I thank them for their forbearance, and we're gonna go for a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna start talking about fire. Is that okay? So come back. We'll say 9:05. You can have 7 minutes. Okay, 9:05. resuming the November 10th select board meeting. So folks, we just sort of went through a presentation from the police department. There's some things to continually investigate. We offered some clear on mud, but sufficient feedback on the sort of the capital items and their, that are being proposed for this budget cycle. But I will say, if folks have any sort of lingering concerns or things that they feel like they didn't have the opportunity to dive into, then please send word to me so we can figure that out for our future agenda items. But, and obviously some of these questions need to be addressed, so we'll have another opportunity to revisit this. So I'm gonna now, we're a little over on our time, but I do wanna make sure that we give the fire department their presentation, and then if we feel, I'm gonna try to get us so we don't go past 10 for this meeting. So I'll say that. I'm gonna just turn it directly over to Chief Northern, if that's okay, Rob,
Sure.
and welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening. I want to go over our operational budget first, and what I'll do is I'll just highlight the reductions that you're seeing in front of you, starting on the top with the firefighter drill and meeting wage, which we reduced by 16%. Going down to the EMS wage, further reduction of 16%. Moving down to the fire education and training and EMS education and training line items, 25% reduction and 14% reduction respectively. Thank you, Rod, or Fielding, I'm not sure which one put that up. Fire truck repair and maintenance, a roughly 10% reduction. You'll notice that the software maintenance and computer maintenance line items are 100% reduction, and that's due to the fact that the town will be taking over all computer servicing and purchasing. So we no longer need those two line items in our operational budget. Moving down to the only really large increase, which is a 50% increase for office supplies, and that's reflective of our new copier contract and the support that needs, i.e. paper, et cetera. That's the large increase of 50% there. And other than that, that's kind of it for the operational budget, short and sweet. We are trying to keep our costs down. I think we've worked well with Fielding and Rod. We met and we discussed things, and these seem to be reasonable reductions. So I don't really have much else to say about that. I'm not sure if folks have questions about the operational budget.
That's great. Let's and we'll probably have more of a substantial discussion for capital, of course. But yes, do folks have any questions about line items relating to operating? My one question. Oh, I see Claudette. Let's get to her first. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, and the reductions in the EMS wages, and what was the other one? Fire?
So we have a reduction in the fire drill wage, or not a reduction, but less money going in for it. And the EMS wage, are those the two you're talking about?
Yeah, is that because you have fewer people in the or responding, or fewer?
No, it's not. It's we felt there was a little fat there to trim, so we trimmed it.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
See, Marcia has a hand.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, this is probably more of a administrative question, but the two departments share a building, and all of the costs for sort of the utilities seems to be on the other budget.
Mm-hmm.
That seems a little unfair. Why isn't it shared? Or is, because presumably electricity and stuff is used equally. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, Marcia, that's the way it's been since it started 4 years ago. So I don't know.
So Fielding has his hand up. Let's hear from him on that. Go ahead, Fielding.
Marcia, to answer your question, I think you'll see at the tail end of this budget presentation, we've kind of split the public safety facility. Simon presented, it's kind of fallen somewhat under police, but it is its own separate little budget chunk. It's not technically part of the police budget. You will see at the end of this presentation, though, with the fire, I've placed in the emergency management. Similar to the public safety facility, this includes our debt service on the tower bonds, power for the communications tower, generator fuel for our emergency generator, those kind of things. These were things that were kind of unscheduled in terms of talking about the budget, but they are budget groupings that we needed to talk about. So I thought these were the best places to place them.
So I have go ahead, Marcia, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, so does that sort of balance out, do you think, in terms of cost sharing?
In terms of cost sharing, it relatively, you're looking about for emergency management, it's a projected budget of $47,875. For the public safety facility, it's $30,680. So it's not dollar for dollar. But they are two groupings that seem to fit nicely, I guess, or as nicely as they could into the respective sides.
Thank you.
Marcia, just to be clear, do you require any follow-up or change, or is that not required? But are you asking for more follow-up and change into that, or are you satisfied by that answer?
No, I mean, I guess I'm satisfied. If it's always been done that way and nobody's upset about it, then fine. It just seemed like if two units are sharing a building, they might more equitably share costs. But if fire has other things that they're paying for, then that's reasonable, I think.
I think this has been addressed that issue has been addressed more meaningfully in this budget, I would say, than prior. But Claudia, I saw your hand.
Yeah, the other piece is that the police department is there 7 days a week. Fire's not. So,
Yeah.
I mean, police department's lights are on more often than fire department's lights are on.
Makes sense.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
So we're good.
Yeah, we're good. Any other folks have questions about any of the line items in the operating budget?
No.
No, I think it's really the sort of the commitment to the ask is appreciated, right? I think that's what I'm seeing. Okay. Anything else? So then then I'm gonna turn to capital, which is probably
Right. So we have the both the equipment designated fund or the capital budget for equipment and the capital budget for apparatus. The apparatus capital budget you should be roughly familiar with because we delved into this extensively when we talked about the purchase of the new engine back in the spring. So this should be relatively familiar to you. So I'm happy to answer whatever questions that you have about it, about either.
So I'm gonna stop sharing on the screen for a second, and then I'm gonna back up and just can someone just sort of maybe Fielding or Rod, if that's okay with the chief, reframe the ask of capital for this year for us, like what's happening in capital, how is it consistent or not consistent with what has been established by the department in the past. So like maybe Rod can start with a little bit of an overview and then we'll turn to the chief. How's that?
I'm going to give a very umbrella-like overview, and then I'll probably ask Fielding to jump in, and then we can go back to the chief. So in general, the fire department has historically had designated funds for each major piece of apparatus and the necessary firefighting equipment that goes with each one of those units. And in the years following the 2017 large storm that impacted our cash flows and changed the town's priorities, the designated funds for those items were reduced dramatically. And so given the service life and the very large expense of apparatus items in particular, the fire department has been working with us to ensure that they do not lose many years of contribution to designated funds such that they cannot replace vital pieces of vital apparatus in a reasonable time frame. So that's the background to the changes in the allocations to designated funds for this year. And then the last piece is a recognition that they're going to put a new vehicle into service in the coming year, and that there's a general expectation that when you've got a brand new vehicle, it should be cheaper to maintain than an old vehicle. And so we're flatlining the maintenance line, which is the part of the operating budget, in recognition of that brief holiday that you get. And then we're taking a brief pause from making such a commitment, a big commitment to that designated fund, and then it will pick up the following year, because it will take a very long period of time and very determined commitment to ensure that we have enough funds on hand to buy its replacement at the end of its life cycle. And with that, I'll turn it over to Fielder, because he's been working with the fire department more closely on the capital budget.
Yes, I think it's very important to highlight that we are digging somewhat out of a hole that, as Rod pointed out, after the 2017 event, the designated fund appropriations were cut drastically. I'd like to point out, if you can look at the capital plan attachment that was presented in the packet, just like to highlight some of the examples of the costs that we're working with and talking about here. The SCBA package is $117,375. That's for the equipment fund. PPE is $8,500, give or take, every year. And the anticipated replacement of the ladder truck in fiscal year 27 has an anticipated cost of $506,127. That's inflation adjusted. As Alex mentioned, they are getting a new engine this year. There was also some engine work, some actual physical, like motor engine work done on another truck as well. That will be pretty much completely depleting their apparatus fund as of the end of fiscal year 22. So that is a large part of why you see, a steadily increasing and substantial appropriation to the apparatus funds. Also, the SCBA package and the PPE will be completely depleting the equipment designated fund. And so we are basically starting from square one, or square zero, effectively, with these fund balances. And so it is going to take a steady and concerted effort to bring these balances back, financially speaking. For the technical details, I will now turn it over to Chief Northern.
Are there questions about the technical details?
Yes, we have some. Marcia was first, and then Claudette.
So the ladder truck, I thought we were doing now, but it looks like on this chart, it's not until 27.
Yes, correct.
Oh, but I thought we were doing it now.
No, the engine 2 is getting done now. Engine 2 is being replaced. The ladder was actually due to be replaced in 26, but it was moved back to 27.
Didn't we just vote to purchase a new vehicle?
Yes,
no,
an engine.
And then just the engine. Okay.
Yes.
So in order to answer Marcia's question, because Marcia's also new, can you talk about the existing fleet that we have right now and what it is that we will replace and what it is that's proposed in 2027? How about that?
Sure. So if you look on the left side under apparatus, so engine 1 is due to be replaced, or actually rehabbed. We've done a lot of that with the replacement of the engine that we just did, and there'll be a couple more upgrades that will be done to it. once the new engine gets here, but otherwise that's pretty much taken care of at this point. We have the new engine 2 in FY22. The tanker, which is our large capacity water vessel, we'll call it that. FY28, we're looking to refurb it, not to replace it, but just to upgrade it and do essentially what we did with engine 1, engine rebuild, suspension replacing, emergency lights replacing, that kind of thing. Then we go down to the ladder, which we just spoke about for FY27. The utility unit isn't on there because it's brand spanking new. It's about a year old or 2 years old now, so it's, let's just call it new. So there's nothing happening there in terms of a purchase for a number of years. And then the chief's car, which was due to be replaced in 24, has been moved all the way to FY28. So kind of the immediate costs are, of course, the engine, which will be paid for out of the designated fund, the apparatus designated fund, and then the rehab of engine 1.
So just to sum up, the fleet as it is now and the fleet that we are discussing, not all of the fleet, but it's, and correct me, right? It's 2 engines, a tanker, a ladder, and a car, a chief's car.
No,
And the utility unit, which is our forestry and road highway safety vehicle.
Okay, so there you go.
Also hazmat equipment.
Okay, and we replaced engine 2.
Yes.
That's what we replaced. And so engine 1 is continued to be refurbished. Ladder 2 is proposed.
We thought it would make we thought it would make eminent sense to just rehab engine 1 after 2 gets here, and that way we'll get about another decade out of engine 1.
Okay, and then just to sort of bring us back, we're sort of the ask of Rod and Fielding is to focus on the capital budget items that have designated fund considerations with our operating. That is sort of what we're discussing tonight, right? And if we do all of our, if we eat all our dinner, we can have dessert, is what I've been told. Let's finish up. So anyway, Claudette, you had your hand up.
I did. I have a couple of questions and one comment. So Alex, I know a couple of years ago I asked you how many of our firefighters respond when there's a call, and at that time it was like 6 per call. 6 people who typically respond.
Mm-hmm.
Has that changed?
Well, those are the vicissitudes of this department, and indeed any department at this point. I can't really tell you with certainty how many people respond every time. Generally, we have between 6 and 8 people responding to fire calls at one time.
Okay, so which leads me to why are we asking for 15 of the air units? The SCABA, is that what it is?
Well, SCBA is an acronym for self-contained breathing apparatus. The breathing apparatus is assigned per position, not for a person. So in other words, let's take engine 1, for example. Engine 1 has 5 positions. So each of those positions, each of those physical seats has a breathing apparatus assigned to it. The tanker has 2, the ladder has 5, I think, and engine 2 also has 5. So that's why you're seeing the number 15, in that it's not per person, it's for the riding position on the piece of apparatus.
Okay, thanks. That answers that question. My my next comment actually is that sometime before 2027, I would really like us to have another ISO investigate or study or survey. I understand. I know at our last budget meetings, you and Neil presented the argument that, well, no, the ladder truck is what has kept us at our insurance costs low. But we have not had a formal ISO, I don't know if you call them a study, in many, many years. So, and with the advent of our dry hydrants, I'm wondering if I would just, before we have that kind of expenditure, I would want a formal ISO rating done.
Noted.
Any other, Marcia probably wants to know what an ISO is. Go ahead.
ISO is another acronym that stands for Insurance Services Organization, and ISO rates every municipality in this country regarding their ability to respond in a timely way to emergencies, their water supply, and many other factors which go into a comprehensive study which sets primarily insurance rates for the municipality that's involved.
Thank you.
I have a comment, but I want to hear from Mary or Rob. Go ahead, Mary.
Now this is, it almost want to be sort of backwards thinking, but I was thinking back to 2017 when we reduced these funds, which I felt very uncomfortable about. But it was in the context of a unprecedented storm, and we were not sure how to finance repairs, and so we kind of dipped into those funds. So my point is, you know, maybe at some point outside of this discussion, we would think about those sort of catastrophic events where we might have to have extraordinary financing, because we really put ourselves in the hole at that point, and now we're dealing with it. But we could well have another event, which, you know, related to climate, that would put us back in that sort of situation. So, you know, it's not, it might be more of a strategic planning type of thing, but it also might be something we want to think about.
Sure. You know, that's hanging over lots of people's
Everything.
heads now.
Yes.
Right? It
Right.
is how do you plan for something that may never happen, may happen in a decade, you know, may happen in the next year.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I think it affected other things. I think it possibly affected the ability of town manager at the time, I mean, to deal with a catastrophic event and to have the tail end of a construction project might have led to some of the deficiencies in the building. So definitely part of strategic planning is sort of think of that sort of type of disruption and how to deal with it before it happens, if possible. So
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll make my comment now because it really relates to Mary's, and then I'll get back to whoever else is coming. I guess I feel, I think strategic planning is, you know, there's lots of reasons why we haven't done it, right? And I think what we learned, or what was evident in when we made the last purchase, the engine 2 replacement purchase, is I had sort of requested of the department to really sort of bring forth a lot of rationale, a lot of materials, and a lot of justifications, and a lot of history, knowing that we were going to be making a purchase, a big capital purchase, sort of outside of the budget conversations, right? And so one of the things I think I'm just going to be blunt. I think I find it very cynical to be basing sort of fleet decisions on a plan from the late 90s. I just do. And I think, you know, I think when we have sort of some stability in our town, right, when we have a town manager on board, and there is time to dive into sort of these strategic planning questions, I really want to know, is this fleet more relevant than ever for our existing moment? Do we need more resources to our fleet or to our personnel, or are we oversized for our town? So I think these questions I would want, to the extent that this board is able to, and we're in a budget discussion where we have sort of our most power, I would want to charge the department with really sort of updating that sort of vision for us, because I think a lot was brought forward and all of it was, you know, great work, but it was, the references felt dated. I won't tell you where I was in 1996. So that's how I feel, and I don't know if others feel the same way. Mary sort of used the word strategic. I don't know, Claudette, I think, has wanted sort of more of a comprehensive review. So I'm fine with this budget, this capital budget. But I do have this sort of caveat that could sort of change, you know, long-term planning, which is I want someone to look at the strategic planning of the fleet, you know, before we, you know, commit to that full 5-year plan, because we're talking a 2-year plan. All right, so that's my piece. I don't know how others feel, and I would like to actually hear from the department, their reactions to that, but I want to hear from board members.
Are you looking to hear my reaction, Roger, or?
I want to get your reaction, but I want to hear from board members first, whether or not if they agree or disagree with sort of like what I had offered, and then anything else that they want to say on capital.
The question one of the questions I would have is, do you take into account the considerations of resiliency with environmental impacts in doing the planning? Has there been discussion in the state about the possibility of having more forest fires or field fires or things like that, and how our equipment would match up to those needs? Certainly, you probably wouldn't need a ladder truck if it's a field fire.
They got the forestry truck, though. That's very up to date, so
yeah,
that probably balances that out.
But that's a good point.
But how much?
12 years.
how much discussion is there going on around the state, other departments in preparing for those kind of events?
Well, you know, we all know that, wildland fires are on an increase. You know, we're lucky in Norwich in that we haven't had a large wildland fire, primarily due to the fact that, you know, we have a pretty good control through the fire warden and the deputy warden about outside burning. And we have a very solid mutual aid system here. And quite frankly, the town of Norwich has some great state-of-the-art equipment on its forestry unit, as well as a pretty solid standing operating procedure when it comes to wildland fires. So we're well prepared. Our neighbors in Thetford and Sharon and Hanover, et cetera, are also quite well prepared. So it's not an immediate concern of mine to be worried about an increase in wildland fires. We're ready to handle it. Now, of course, any wildland fire, which really is many times precipitated by a drought, can happen. And you know, whether you feel like global warming is happening or not, you know, summers are hotter, they're drier, and you know, lightning strikes cause wildland fires, not just human intervention. So you know, the difficulty of really kind of master planning for fire defense when it comes to wildland fires is an art, and I'll call it modern art. And in that sense, it's very much a conversation, I think, that goes on at the state level, but we're not on the back foot, and we're not on any kind of emergency kind of status about it, because you don't know when a wildland fire is going to strike. They do, but it's hard to predict.
Okay.
Robert, does that answer your question?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
And that's a great question. Thank you. Colette?
So Roger, in answer to your question, I do also agree that there needs to be some strategic planning, which is why I feel strongly that we need another ISO rating or study or whatever. I also think that since that one has been done, I don't know how much our mutual aid partners have increased their capabilities, especially Hanover, Hartford. So you know, there's all kinds of questions about what's the right size that I don't think we have.
And I'm happy. Do you want me to answer that now, or is this a conversation you want to have later?
Unless board members have any other comments, I think we would benefit from just sort of hearing a little bit of, you know, a little bit of a reaction to that. I'm sort of going beyond what I stated I wanted to do out of these discussions.
Sure.
But...
Well, Sure. In my mind, strategic planning isn't something that's done at one point and then left and cast aside for years. Strategic planning, as far as I'm concerned, is done on a continual basis. Every time that the deputy and I sit down to do a budget, we look forward. If you look on our capital plans, we're looking forward to FY30. And that part of that exercise is to think about what we have for apparatus, what we have for equipment, and what is going to help us to provide the best quality service when we're talking about saving lives and property in the town of Norwich. So I'm actually happy right now with the size of the fleet. I think it reflects the growth that's going to happen in Norwich. Norwich is growing because of McMansions, right? We have more building going on in the rural-urban interface, the town-urban interface. And so we're seeing more homes being built, right? But not on the scale of a Hartford. You can't compare us to Hartford because Hartford is throwing up high-rises now. And they have a lot more to do to plan for fire defense because of an increase in population, because of the size of the buildings that they're building now. And Norwich is a small town. We're not going to experience that kind of growth. And so the fleet that we have right now, I think, is a pretty good size for what we're looking at down the road. Now, certainly, if you look down the road, and let's just say a decade, we have lots of folks moving in for COVID. Let's see if they're around in 5 years. There may be people who have left because we're too rural. They can't get their takeout at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that kind of remains to be seen. So my professional opinion at this point is that we have the right fleet for right now. I think we have the right fleet looking forward. And strategic planning is not something that I do incrementally. It's something that's done all the time.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk to Matt, but then I'm gonna and thanks so much, Alex, for sort of I took us off and I shouldn't have done that because I want to keep it on the capital items that we see proposed, and I want to ask people any questions about that. But I'll take Matt's comment and then we'll maybe we'll move on.
Right. So I guess I'll be brief, but I did want to echo what Chief Northern said, which is that capital planning and evaluating our fleet and evaluating the equipment that we need is an ongoing process that we do. I mean, from a small point of view, it's something that we do after every call if necessary. Do we have the right stuff that we need to do to provide the services, the emergency services that we're asked to do? We also evaluate, every year, do we have the right equipment? Do we have the right fleet? It's not, our capital planning goes out 30 years ahead. And we're always thinking about what we need. It's something that we're always reevaluating. And I would agree that we have, the right balance right now. Also to just mention, to give you an example of sort of that planning, do we have what we need? In 2015, I believe, out on Tigertown Road, we had the largest forest fire in Norwich, which was 135 acres. And as you might know, any structure fire in the Upper Valley or any forest fire in the Upper Valley, we always get mutual aid. We always have fire departments from other towns respond to structure fires or forest fires. That's just the way things work, whether it's in Hanover, Hartford, Lebanon, Stratford, Thetford, anywhere. We all take care of each other and we'll show up to do the job. Out there, we realized that we needed to not necessarily get more stuff to fight the forest fires that were happening, but just make sure that we were better organized. So Hanover Dispatch took it upon themselves to really record what everybody had in the area, what the resources they had to fight forest fires. And now when we have forest fires, we can more appropriately dispatch all the needed resources for the size of the fire. That happens with structure fires as well. And I feel like the apparatus that we have in our apparatus bay here, not only fits for Norwich, but also fits for the Upper Valley in general, for what we need to contribute to our mutual aid association and going forward there. So like the chief said, we are constantly thinking about how to provide the services necessary to Norwich and also to the Upper Valley. But I think it would be great to have an in-depth discussion with the select board members, town manager, finance director on our, on the makeup of our fleet and the stuff that we need for long-term planning, because I think everyone would benefit from that. I know that just in a small scale, when we met with Fielding and Rod about our budget, I feel like we had this wonderful chance to really describe to them, what we do as a fire department, what we need going forward as a fire department. And I know that Alex and I both felt really, I don't know, well listened to in that meeting. And it was wonderful. And to be able to share that with the rest of the select board, we would look forward to that.
Yeah, touche. Thank you so much, Matt. Marcia, I see your hand, and then we'll do another round and we can move on.
So I think Matt brought up an interesting point, which was about the coordination that Hanover is doing. And I'm thinking that sort of thing, I'd just like to know that it was regularized so that we're not relying on other people for that kind of coordination, but maybe, I don't know how it would work, but I like to take control of stuff, and basically would want to be ensured that we were going to be able to count on that sort of coordination, because I think there can be targeted things like the 135-acre fire where you really need to know what everybody has and what's going to happen. So is that a possibility? Do we need to do more to help that, become a regularized thing we can depend upon?
It's dependable now, Marcia, and it's dependable through what we call our run cards, or the order that apparatus is dispatched, not only from Norwich, but from our surrounding communities. And that's something that's always looked at and revised. When I came here, I did a full revision of our run cards to make sure that the town is getting the resources from our mutual aid association that we need in the event of any kind of emergency, really. And I know that happens with other towns too. So again, that's an ongoing endeavor that most of our fire departments that we operate with do all the time. So yes, we're right sized, and the mutual aid system is robust, and we work together to make sure those resources are available for not just for Norwich, but for other towns as well.
Good, thank you.
Okay, Matt, and
yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because when I referenced Hanover, it wasn't Hanover Fire Department, it was Hanover Dispatch Service. And so it's their job to make sure that the dispatching is correct and that all the resources are maintained and the information about what's available is maintained. So it wasn't something that they proactively did that we don't do. That's actually, if you look at the line item in our operating budget, the really large number that says Hanover Dispatch, we're getting what we pay for, and they do an excellent job. But it's not something that we, should have done.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring us back. So we're having sort of this larger ranging conversation, only I think because we're making the capital requests for this budget discussion have us making allocations to the fire apparatus and the equipment fund. So we're having a little bit of that discussion. So those appropriations are proposed. In addition, it's the SCBA package and the PPE. So does anyone have any sort of concerns or problems? Otherwise, we'll move on and we'll have very sort of little feedback for revision of this budget.
I'm comfortable with it. So.
Great. I think Claudia and I sort of expressed our open questions that are not resolved in this budget cycle, I think. I'm not hearing it. I'm not seeing a nod from Claudia, but I'm going to move on. Yeah, okay, she's nodding. Okay, wonderful. All right, so thank you to our fire department for your time and for waiting. I'm sorry, we were a little over. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item Ratification of response to public records request appeal. Board will be asked to ratify the letter response. There's an executive session proposed. That a motion was required. Claudette, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if you also wanted to add something about our next agenda, and I didn't know if you wanted to do that first before the.
Yes, I think that's smart. Let me back up and say that our next agenda item should be basically very simple. Our next meeting, we proposed in the budget schedule that we would meet next week. It's the day before Thanksgiving, and I wonder if we should.
That's not next week. Next week is not the day before Thanksgiving.
Week after. I don't know time. What is it? The 24th is our next meeting. It's the weekend. It's the day before Thanksgiving. Would we like to cancel it, or would we like to reschedule it? How are we feeling?
What if we met next Wednesday? Reschedule.
So the question, staff are quivering at the suggestion.
And they're quivering at that idea. I'm still okay with the 24th if we need to stay caught up.
So just to back check, what we would get from the 24th is what we would have gotten is a revised budget based on tonight's discussion, and we would have talked more deliberately about a vehicle replacement schedule for these departments. I think what we've learned is that the vehicle replacement schedule, there's some open questions about Article 36 issues, as there ever is, but we're learning that it's a 10-year replacement schedule, and we're learning from the other conversation we just had that we really are not there for fire. So perhaps that's not going to actually be a very meaningful discussion at this point or for this year.
That makes sense. And we wouldn't want to move any of the other pieces of the budget forward because it's going to be too much to do that. So it's probably sensible to cancel that meeting in that case. That's logical to me.
I think Fielding has his hand up. What he might be proposing is that he may get us revised documents reflective of this conversation, but we might not need to discuss them.
Right.
Is that say, Fielding?
It actually wasn't, but I can certainly do that for you. I did want to at least raise the concept that we would be we are scheduled for that time frame to have an AP warrant that I would like to have handled in some manner, so we're not going a month in between paying our vendors.
So this is what I would propose to the group and see if you agree. That we cancel our meeting on the 24th, that you authorize me to sign the warrant, or me or Mary, whatever, and that we resume at our next meeting the discussion. We resume the next
December. Yeah.
So how are folks feeling?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, sounds fine. But I don't think I think we've already authorized, you already have that authorization. I don't think we need to.
That's true. Gonna need to create it again.
No.
Or if you want a formal motion to authorize you or Mary to sign the AP warrant, that would end.
I think it's necessary.
No, I
think we already.
Well, let me tell you what powers I have here. I do not have power to sign the AP warrant. I have power to sign the payroll warrant.
Oh, it's the payroll that gets off schedule, not the AP. Okay.
And to do this next AP warrant.
Okay. All right.
So I actually then move to authorize Roger Arnold or Mary Layton to sign the AP warrant dated, question for you, Fielding, November 26th or November 23 or 24?
Let me bring up my calendar. I'm proposing to have the warrant be dated for the 23rd so I can get the checks out prior to the Thanksgiving holiday.
I move to authorize either Roger Arnold or Mary Layton to sign the AP warrant dated November 23, 2021.
I second.
Second. Oh,
I saw Rod's
Sorry.
hand.
Yeah.
I think you better let me second that one. There
Oh,
might be
okay.
a conflict.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Very good.
All right. Woo. All right. Made by Claudette, seconded by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right. Now, unless I'm wrong again, we move on to the ratification of the response to the public records request appeal. There's a proposed motion in the packet to make. Do we, Marcia, do you have, yes, we have a proposed motion in the packet. How are we, would we like to make that motion? I guess my question is it a matter of pending litigation, or should we be revising this
That's a
motion?
question for Marcia.
No, it's a question for Rod.
I'm sorry. I would describe our current situation as being currently in litigation.
Okay, great. So let's.
So just amend the motion so it doesn't say pending, it says current.
I
just wondered.
I think Rod is saying that the motion is accurate as draft, in his opinion.
Because the pending could always be more litigation that's coming up, probably.
Mm-hmm.
I think that describes.
Is it not just?
So
Is
I
it
have.
not just?
Is it not just?
Is it not just covered under 6, subsection 6?
Which is what? Defined as what?
Records exempt from the access to public records provisions of section 316 of this title, provided, however, that the discussion of the exempt record shall not itself permit an extension of the executive session to the general subject to which the record pertains. In other words, it's simply discussion about access to public records.
That are exempt and thus necessitating.
That are exempt.
So,
right.
So we have a motion that's been proposed for us, and we're having a discussion about something else. So my job is to ask for a motion.
I don't understand this conversation at all. Is the motion that's in our motion sheet inappropriate to the action that we're going to take or not?
I think
depends on.
Depends on what?
I think it depends on the facts. If there is pending litigation or there isn't, or there.
Well,
I don't know that.
Would it be, is it possible to cite both sections, or is that not allowed? I have no idea. This seems like a legal question in itself of how to frame this, which I don't have an answer to.
So
maybe
I'm going to, so this motion is giving to us as advice, right? So I'm going to seek further context on that advice before we go further. So Rod, can you provide a little bit more clarity if you may, if you can?
Let me see if I can do this. So the question that select board members have appears to be around the use of the word pending in the motion. And so what I'd say, the way I would characterize the current circumstances is that we are currently in legal action with a citizen with regard to what items are subject to the Public Record Request Act or not. And so the judge has not delivered a decision. The matter is open, it's not closed. And so therefore, the discussion of the town's disposition in public could disadvantage the town in ongoing proceedings. We are currently in proceedings. It is an open matter. It is not concluded.
So that is Rod's, that is the advice we are given on our motion sheet, right? And so if we would like to take the advice, we have the ability to read from our motion sheet. We also have the ability to make any other motion with following the guidelines and boundaries that we are to do so. So I feel comfortable with the motion, with the advice that is drafted, and we can do it. I would propose someone make the motion.
I'd say based on the facts that were presented, that the motion as written would be okay. Mary,
That's
do you want to
great.
make it?
Yes, please. Would you like to make it, Marcia? Henry?
Is there a motion? Oh, I'd like to make a motion to enter executive session under 1 VSA section 313A1E.
Let's go back.
And to,
Two-part motion though, Marcia.
Let's go back.
yes,
It's a
We have
two-part
to-
motion.
Mary,
Oh.
can you, let's, or we have to make.
go ahead, Mary.
Okay.
Only because Mary is well oiled.
Well, okay, I mean, so I move to find that premature general public knowledge about pending litigation would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Okay, is there a second? Made by Mary, seconded by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Great, thank you. Now, Marcia, would you like to make the motion, the next motion now?
The second one, yeah. That's the one with litigation.
I move to enter executive session under 1 VSA section 313A1E and to invite Rod Francis into the executive session.
That's
I will
great.
second it.
Great, made by Marcia, seconded by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to put folks in the waiting room. think I saw Marcia's hand first.
Marcia.
Marcia, yep. Mary, Marcia.
And 27. We have to vote, though.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great, we're in public. Is there any action that we would like to take? Go ahead, Claudette.
I move to ratify the letter written by Roger Arnold dated October 7, 2021 to Chris Katucki related to the Freedom of Information request.
Great. Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Rob. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you, Dennis. Okay, 10:27, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, second?
Second.
Made by Mary, seconded by Marcia. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our.
Have to vote. Have to vote.
Just thanking the people. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Good night, everyone.